I shared 2 links in the chat. I have a resource sheet which will have some of the information, certainly the important links to information I share here. And then there's a second sheet, which is the links to the Jewish texts that I'll be sharing. Let me share my screen. If you have questions, that you want to drop in the chat, please do that. Ilana and Laura are going to monitor, so I will not be checking that out. So if there's something that they should interrupt me for, by all means. If not, we'll do Q&A at the end. So thank you very much for letting me into your homes. I'm glad to have you in my home. And I want to say first and foremost, thank you very much to Rabbanit Goldie Guy for preparing the Jewish text portion. I couldn't have done that. So if you like it, it's her product. If you don't like it, it's just probably because I presented it in an odd way. Get the disclosures out first and foremost. None of the information here represents a preference or an endorsement by me, by my company, or anybody else or organization that participated in preparing the presentation. And neither I nor the company receive any financial support or employed by any of the agencies named in the presentation. I am, full disclosure, I am a part owner of the US EPA and the USDA, but my share of that ownership is what, 1 of 300 million people or so. So it's negligible. Let's start with the vocabulary. Ilana mentioned that we're talking about composting and I would get into it. I'm going to jump into it right away. We're going to talk about composting today, and it's the idea that we're sending our food scraps off for composting. So food scrap diversion is really what we're talking about. It may sound like a bit of semantics or nitpicking, but I think it's important to raise the point because there is at-home backyard composting. You can do this. Plenty of people do it. We're just not going to talk about it. We're going to do our urban context. Let's collect our food scraps, send them to somebody else to compost them for us. So really what we're focusing on is food scrap diversion from the landfill waste stream. So we're going to collect our food scraps at home, at school, or in the office, and then have a hauler collect those materials and send them off to a commercial processor who will then actually process and compost that material. Another bit of vocabulary is food scraps versus food waste. So I will always talk about the material that you're generating in your home as food scraps. The food material in my home is food scraps. You've prepared a meal, you've cut some fat off, you've cut the carrot tops off, whatever it is you've done to that vegetable that requires attention and grooming before you eat it. That's a scrap. If there's a little bit of food left on the plate, that's a scrap. Edible food that should have been, truly should have been eaten, but was thrown away, that's food waste. That's a social issue. That's something we need to address. We need to try not to waste that food. We need to try and get it into the mouths and stomachs of the people who need that food. So I really try to encourage folks to use the vocabulary food scraps. And then again, just to talk about the diversion versus composting. So we'll use them interchangeably tonight. Compost, what is compost? Actually, compost has a legitimate definition. It's a US Composting Council. There is a US Composting Council, a very elaborate definition. It's more than we need for this context. I'm going to try to keep things focused. So the short version, it's organic material which has completed a biological transformation into a stable soil amendment product. So it's not just rotten. It's actually a whole bunch of processes, different temperatures, different stages, different microbes. It's a whole process. What is organics composting? What do you get? You put your organics in, out comes a compost product, and there is some CO2 which is generated as a byproduct. But don't be alarmed, it's not a significant amount of CO2. This is an article I recommend to everybody and anybody. This is one of the first things that got me on this path from a medical practice onto this waste management pathway. This is an article written in 2012 and updated in 2017, released by the National Resources Defense Council. Dana Gunders and her team put this together. It's outstanding and it's shocking. 40% of the food that's grown in this country ends up being thrown away, tossed into the landfill. It's a dramatic statistic, and it's something that we as a country need to do significant things to address. So America's garbage. This is a chart from the US EPA. It's a 2018 publication that was updated in December of 2020. And MSW is municipal solid waste. That's garbage. That's the garbage we generate as a country. And in 2018, 146 million tons of material was sent to the landfill. Of that 146 million tons, approximately 24% was food material. And it's also, just besides being a lot of material, it's a ridiculously large amount of material, it's also an extremely heavy material. So here's that same report, again, the 2018 fact sheet with a 2020 update. The chart on the left is generation, how much material, how much municipal solid waste is generated, and that chart on the right is the one you just saw, which is the amount that's sent for landfilling. So almost half of it is diverted in some manner. So maybe the food that we waste is sent for animal feed, right? There's some opportunity. So half of the material is addressed and kept out of the landfills. But even then, so in the generation stage, about 21%, 22%. But then when we go to landfill, we're still throwing 24%. 24% of the landfill material is still food. And then you might wonder, where is the food wasted? So again, this is that NRDC report. 43% of the wasted food is in our households. So we can do a whole lot if we're conscious of the problem and conscientious about the solutions and are modifying our behaviors. I pointed this 8% as well, because if we move into our schools, we have the opportunity to get closer to 50% if we can do some work in our schools to address the issue. And this is a fun graphic. This is in the resource sheet. Same NRDC article, and they basically show you what this waste means, how you translate it into other metrics, and basically it's shocking. The particular things that grab my attention in particular are 19% of all U.S. croplands. So if you imagined how much land we use for agriculture, imagine throwing 20% of that land away, literally, because what you're generating is going into landfill. 21% of the US agricultural water usage wasted, and agricultural water usage is among the greatest usage of water in our country. All right, so when you have your food scraps and you send them off to the landfill, what happens? You end up with greenhouse gases. The landfill is an anaerobic, meaning no oxygen environment. The anaerobic digestion process, that breakdown process, leads to generation of these greenhouse gases. CO2 is one of them, and the one that we talk about in the global warming context. But methane is a principal product of this anaerobic circumstance in the landfill. And I'm just going to read the quote. This is from the United Nations. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas with a 100-year global warming potential, 25 times that of CO2. Measured over a 20-year period, methane is 84 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than CO2. So everything you can do to keep your food scraps out of that landfill prevents the generation of these greenhouse gases, and methane in particular is a horrible gas for our environment. I have a little note at the bottom here to say that limited greenhouse gas capture and conversion at US landfills. You may have heard of gas to energy. There are circumstances where anaerobic digestion or capture of these gases happens, and you can convert it into renewable natural gas for use in vehicles or other purposes to generate electricity. All landfills have some equipment in place to capture the greenhouse gases. Otherwise, there's the potential of an explosion at the landfill, kind of a dramatic scene. But unfortunately, the minority, a small minority of landfills in the US actually do convert that gas. Most of that gas is flamed, so they burn it and it's setting off into the environment. So there is a solution to that problem, but it's not implemented. And in the global warming context, in the global climate change context, compost is a remedy rather than a cause of the trouble. You may be familiar with the term carbon sink. It's a way to grab our CO2, put it into a form that's stable, grab it from the atmosphere and sequester it. The oceans are the largest single source of carbon sink that we have. Soil is another huge carbon sink. And trees grab that CO2 and put it to use. So it's the carbon in compost is stable. There is a life cycle where it does, I mean, it's a complicated life cycle. There is some emission from soil, but ultimately think of it as actually planting that carbon where it belongs in the soil. And then there are secondary and tertiary benefits derived by the use of the compost itself. It creates a healthier soil, sets up circumstances where you can actually mitigate against climate change and even reverse. Okay, so you get a triple win with compost. If your food scraps end up in the landfill, greenhouse gas generation, you're part of the problem. We are part of the problem. Nutrient recycling. So compost allows the nutrients in our food scraps to be recycled, truly recycled. You apply the compost to a soil that's used for agriculture, you raise a new crop, and the nutrients are incorporated into those plants, into those crops. We eat them, we cut the tops off, we repeat the cycle. Additionally, and importantly, compost does really help to develop a healthy soil. It restores and creates an environment where the normal, natural, healthy ecosystem can essentially be recreated. Our soils are really depleted and destroyed, thus the need for natural fertilizers. And the compost that you would generate with your food scraps can help to restore an opportunity for natural, healthy ecosystems. Landfill, your food scraps go to landfill, those nutrients are trapped in perpetuity. All right, the time in for, yeah, sure.
Before we jump to the Torah, we did get a question a few slides back from Ben Kleinman about, are those numbers around 24% food waste more or less consistent with today, since it was a previous?
Yeah. The food audits, the waste audits are remarkably unpleasant and complicated audits, as you can imagine. But yeah, unfortunately, the needle hasn't moved very much at a national level.
Thank you.
It may be tipping nicely in some places where they have food scrap bans in place. Vermont, California, New York, those are states that are on the leading edge and have bans in place. See, Benjamin, yeah.
Are there any like landfills that compost in the landfill? Like, 'cause I can, like, instead of like getting people to sort it at home or something like that, or I don't know.
Yeah, if something ends up in the hauling stream destined for a landfill, it's landfilled. As a matter of fact, interestingly enough, a common place to find a compost facility is on top of a landfill that's been closed down. A landfill that reached end of life, reached its capacity. They'll use that space as an operating surface for for compost operations, because that land's already dedicated to waste management, and the facility's already there. But no, there's no sorting process. All right. So this again, thank you very, very much to Rabbanit Goldie. Ben Bagbag said, turn it over and again, turn it over, for all is in it. And the interpretation of the author in the article that I was reading was shared with me. The entire universe is contained within the Torah, and to access its wisdom, one must read it over and over, uncovering a new layer of meaning with each turn of the scroll. So perfect. You know, Torah, we start anew every year. Nutrient and carbon cycling and compost. You know, it's a beautiful thing that nutrient is not wasted. And then just for the fun of it, there is physical turning involved in the composting process. A quote from Rav Kook, every part of the vegetable world is singing a song and breathing forth a secret of the divine mystery of the creation. And then the last is from Rabbi Isaac Luria of Safad, an inspiration behind those who actually are behind the Kabbalah. I'll read the whole thing. It's a couple of slides, but it's a story. And when God said, let there be light, the light that came into being filled the darkness, and 10 holy vessels came forth, each filled with primordial light. In this way, God sent forth those 10 vessels, like a fleet of ships, each carrying its cargo of light. Had they all arrived intact, the world would have been perfect, but the vessels were too fragile to contain such a powerful divine light. They broke open, split asunder, and all the holy sparks were scattered like sand, like seeds, like stars. That is why we were created, to gather the sparks, no matter where they are hidden. And when enough holy sparks have been gathered, the broken vessels will be restored, and Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world, awaited so long, will finally be complete. Therefore, it should be the aim of everyone to raise these sparks from wherever they are imprisoned, and to elevate them to holiness by the power of their soul. So here's the parallel. Scattered sparks, composting. We typically treat food scraps as waste, scattered sparks, powerless alone, but they're not. We should take deliberate action to gather those food scraps, even though this requires extra effort and dedication. And the result of our investments is the compost product, which repairs environmental damage and mitigates against further damage. So Tikkun Olam. All right. So now we're going to get into the hows and whys. We've done the whys. We're going to do the hows and whats. So you, as the diverter, your two most important responsibilities are to know what may be composted and what you must not add to your compost bucket. Contamination is the biggest problem in food scrap diversion, and it's the reason that most compost facilities actually don't want to accept food scraps. So if it doesn't belong in the bucket, don't put it in the bucket. Don't let it in. And just keep in mind, recycle it first. If you can repurpose a piece of food, do that, and then send it for composting second. So what can you send for composting? And the answer is, unfortunately, it depends upon your hauler. So when you sign up with a collection service, follow the instructions and the guidelines that they set. And I'll explain that in a moment. So all produce, all fruits and vegetables can go into your compost stream, but you have to be meticulous about removing all of the produce stickers, the twist ties and rubber bands that we all have on our store-bought goods. Breads, grains, cooked foods, coffee grounds and filters, tea bags, as long as there are no staples, eggshells, and more. Those are items that do belong in your compost bin. And there's a saying, if it grows, it goes. It sounds nice, but it's not always true. So be careful. Here's a problem category, and this is why it's really important to stick with whatever your hauler is instructing you to do. Meats, fats, bones, and dairy might not be acceptable. So it's not the science of composting that makes these problem products. It's the question of the composting facility's ability to handle them or willingness to handle them. These are items that are more likely to attract pests, such as birds, rats, and other wildlife, and that's not a great thing. And they're also items that are more likely to have strong odors. If you consider being a neighbor of a facility like this, not such a great thing, and it often leads to complaints. enforcement, et cetera. It's not something that the facilities often want to contend with. So some will not take it. So if your hauler does not accept the material, please don't add it to your collection. And if they're not acceptable, then you're left having to send it to the landfill. What are the contaminants? You know, the obvious contaminants are things like I said, the produce stickers, metal and plastic ties, rubber bands. But there are plenty of other contaminants that are less obvious. Pet waste and cat litter are not acceptable. Cartons, most cartons are made of mixed materials, so you can't use those, you can't send those. Typical paper plates, cups, and plastic cutlery. Typically, you have coated papers, or these are plastics that are made of non-compostable plastics. Clothing, surprisingly, people think that you can compost clothing. Buttons, zippers, obviously are contaminants, but even the mixed fibers, the cotton will break down, but the synthetic fibers won't. So those are contaminants. Please don't add those. And it's important to realize that you are the last safeguard before the contaminants reach the composting facility for processing and processing. There isn't a great screening process. So what Benjamin suggested in terms of a sorting process where you could take the food scraps out and let the other stuff go to landfill, it would be nice. It's just that process doesn't exist yet. So keep your material clean. If you're unsure, err on the side of caution and throw that material into the landfill and don't include it in your food scrap bucket. And I say your mother won't clean up after you. There isn't a reliable automated screening process. When that material hits the facility, actual people try to remove the obvious visible contaminants, large plastic bags, large pieces of whatever metal. But it's hard, and I'll show you at scale what that means. There's a concept called wish cycling, which is when you throw something into a recycling bin and you really wish that would be recycled. You expect that somebody on the receiving end of that material will sort it. And then if they can't recycle it, they'll send it to a landfill. You know, that's a real problem. It's a problem for the recycling community, and it's an even bigger problem for the composting community. Just to reinforce why contamination is a problem for the composting community, whatever you throw into the compost facility ends up in that finished product. And if you imagine using the compost, you really don't want glass or metal in your compost if you're putting it in your garden or in your field. So this was a pretty dramatic experience for me. This is what your food scraps end up looking like. They end up in a truck. They're consolidated. They get picked up at your house. They end up consolidated at a facility, packed into a semi-trailer. This is the truck at the tipping bed. And this is the truck being emptied. So they literally pick the trailer up and dump it. And this is another image from a different facility. This is a truck that had an organics route, clearly got a whole bundle of produce from probably a produce supply facility, and it must have come to end of life because here it is being dumped. So you can imagine, trying to retrieve a produce sticker off of any one of those items? Not so easy at the composting facility, right? So it's your responsibility to take care of that before it hits the field. This is what a windrow looks like, our windrow field looks like. Each one of these piles is called a windrow. That's where the composting process happens in a typical commercial composting context. So again, if you imagine a chip bag or a cup that is not compostable, or a fork, a plastic fork, picking it out in this context is really a challenge. This is a truck that actually turns the piles. It'll actually spin the material so that the center of the pile becomes the periphery and the periphery becomes the center. Same story. You can't possibly pick out a contaminant in this process with this truck. Okay, next step. What do you do if you want to start to compost at home or divert your food scraps at home, at school, the office? So the first step is research and select your food scrap hauler. find one that meets your needs and your expectations. Most of these services have an every other week food collection or food scrap collection, and many will charge a premium if you'd like to have a weekly pickup. If you're doing it in an office context or another commercial context, then that's obviously something you can negotiate differently than a household. And then how do you collect it? So the principal models are bucket exchange, where you have a typical 5-gallon bucket. Think of your Home Depot bucket. There's typically a liner. You throw your food scraps in there, and then every other week, the company exchanges a clean bucket for the filled bucket. A group cart is another model where you have a cart at a curbside or some other alley, and then neighbors from around the area all pitch in, dump their food scraps into this cart. If you think of the 96-gallon garbage cart that Chicago typically uses, food scrap cart collection is usually done with a 24 to 30-gallon cart because of the dramatic weight of the food scraps. And the third is a ride-along or municipal third cart model. So these are situations where the town has landscape waste collection, your grass, your leaves, and in those communities that have the food scrap collection ride-along, you're able to throw your food scraps into that organics container and it's picked up. Illinois actually is a bit of a leader in that. We have many more municipalities that offer this kind of service than a lot of other states, but unfortunately, most people in those communities don't even realize that they have this service available. The mechanics, okay, so you have your kitchen sink container, you do whatever food prep you choose to do, and you have a little bucket next to the sink, you dump your material, your food scraps into that container, and that's your first stage. If you want to store some material in the freezer because you don't want to have the odors, you could do that. You don't necessarily need to do that. Most people probably don't. In that kitchen sink container, I think it's important to think about, do you use a compostable liner, a plastic bag, or do you do it liner free? And the reason I say you should think about this is that every bit of plastic, whether compostable or not, is a contaminant. If you're using a compostable bag, you're going to have the expense of the bag, plus that bag actually is perceived as contamination at a lot of facilities. And I can't explain that immediately. I can get to it later if you choose. But you may choose to do it liner free. Then you take your kitchen sink container and you empty it into your larger bucket. So you take it to your 5-gallon bucket, which has a liner, or you run it out to the cart. And then you repeat. So this is my experience. I just chose to go bare bones, and I have a glass receptacle with a silicone seal on a plastic top. I load my food scraps in, and it doesn't sit at my on my countertop. I just pop it underneath my garbage can, and there it sits until I take it out to the cart. Compostable products. Something important here is that there's so much vocabulary that's misunderstood, unfortunately. Compostable is not the same as biodegradable, and it's not the same as recyclable. And there are a whole group of materials that are described as bio. Compostable, biodegradable, and recyclable are, terms that actually have definitions. Bio, just because something's made of a natural material, right, a bioplastic, that doesn't mean that it's going to compost. Just because the oil that is used comes from a plant doesn't mean that material will break down in a compost facility or is even biodegradable. If you put a compostable product into a landfill, it will not compost. It will not break down. The environment is not right. The temperatures are not right. The air, you're in an anaerobic environment without oxygen or environment, where the compostable material is designed to break down in an oxygen-rich environment, an aerobic environment. So it's important that you understand the difference in the materials. So how do you trust that something actually is compostable? You're going to look for something that's certified compostable. And the only entity that's out there in big numbers, with products in big numbers that you can trust, is an organization called BPI, the Biodegradable Products Institute. This is the logo that you should look for on the packaging. If you're going to buy plastic bags, if you're going to buy plates, you're going to buy cups, forks, cutlery, whatever. This is the label that you look for. This is a third party that ensures that the products are made to what are called ASTM standards or standards. This ASTM provides standards for all sorts of items, but this BPI certifies that these products meet the guidelines. There's another organization called CMA, Composting Manufacturing Alliance. Their label's not out there in great numbers yet, but it's going to be coming. They actually take the materials, run them through the composting facilities to ensure that they break down under operating conditions. And the other thing I want to point out is that Europe has their own standards, similar to the US standards, but they're also to be trusted. This is the BPI label. The top horizontally oriented label is what they used to use. Now it's become more of their letterhead and web page marking. They're transitioning to the lower logo, which is BPI compostable. So you actually have another trigger that it's actually their organization and it's compostable. So it reinforces it. If you see these logos, you see these markings, you can trust this product. I will say just briefly that not every facility, as a matter of fact, the minority of facilities are comfortable with compostable products. But I will also say that most of the haulers that are named in this presentation on the resource sheet will accept this material and have arrangements with their composting facilities, which brings me to the next step. These are companies that are available to provide service in Lakeview. I'm not going to guarantee it's a complete list. Block Bins uses the alley cart model, a shared alley cart model. There's a lock on the cart. So if you subscribe, you can put your food scraps into that cart. Urban Canopy is the company that the green team contracted with. Was it, I feel like it was 2 Sukkots ago, right? Or so. And that's the cart that's at the back of the property still. They do a bucket exchange program as well as a cart service. Collective Resource Compost has a bucket exchange program and a cart service for larger generators and for special events. If you are in Skokie or you have people in Skokie or Evanston, they have a municipal contract with the cities of Evanston and Skokie to provide food scrap services in those towns. Healthy Soil Compost operates a bucket exchange program. And I believe the Resource Center has an alley cart, but I'm not 100% sure. These are the references for the Jewish Learning section. Again, they're in this resource sheet. And if you would like to reach me, this is where I am. Happy to talk about composting, food scrap diversion, other talks, dive deeper into this. And then I also want to highlight the Illinois Food Scrap Coalition. This is a remarkable resource if you want to learn anything more about composting, compost use. I serve as the vice chair of the organization. So I thank you very much. And I will welcome questions.
Can I ask a sort of optimistic question? Can you expand more on the reversal of the climate damage, the environmental damage?
Yeah, so first and foremost, whatever you can do to tip us away from what we're doing wrong, that's step number one. Let me see if I can stop sharing. You are sharing, stop sharing. So, that's step number one. And then the environmental benefits of compost. I mean, that's most of my day is spent on getting people to add compost to soil and to use it in ways that are valuable. That has an opportunity to really do a tremendous amount of good. If you can imagine just locking that compost into soils, if you can imagine a lot of energy is used to create the chemical fertilizers. You don't need as much chemical fertilizer on a farm if you are using compost and have created a healthy environment. The microbes and the plants themselves, they have an exchange system underground that's so amazing. I mean, they say, hey, you need some potassium? I got some potassium. And then they send it along a little fungal, hyphae for, a mile away, and there you go, you got a happy plant. So if you let that happen, you don't need as many chemical additives, you create, less demand for creating that. And then the algae blooms, just think of a very concrete example of where this can help us out. If you have a healthier soil, whatever you add to the soil, whatever your chemical fertilizer is, it's gonna stay in that soil. The amount of retention is improved with a healthier soil, with a compost amended soil. So if you apply that you apply that fertilizer, and a rain event happens, in our current situation, that rain event happens and it carries off a significant amount of the fertilizer. It ends up in our rivers, it runs down the Mississippi, boom, algae bloom in the Gulf, because we've killed off all sorts of stuff by throwing that fertilizer where it doesn't belong and upsetting the natural balance in the Gulf. So each one of these is a way that you can make a difference with the compost, and it does reverse the damage, right? Let the ecosystem recover.
See, Ruth has her hand raised.
I do. I have a question about the kinds of vegetable matter that you can put in compost. Can you put in woody materials like artichoke stems and leaves, or is that too difficult to break down, or because this is such a big scale, it doesn't matter?
So if you are in a backyard model, you may be challenged by that, but there's a term, it's called overs, right? So if you run your product through the composting process, and let's just say it's supposed to take 8 weeks, when you get done with your composting process, you run this you run the compost through a screening process, and it takes any item that's larger than a certain size, and it sorts that out. So those are called overs. So if an over is a piece of wood, is a piece of whatever, artichoke this or whatever, if it's an over and it's an organic over, it'll go back into the compost pile and they'll run it through another cycle. And within at worst 3 cycles, it's gone.
Thank
And
you.
when your product hits the tipping floor, it's actually taken through a grinder. It's pretty well beaten up and mixed with other materials, so that there's a ratio. You're looking for a certain carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you want to blend the greens of the food with the carbons of wood material, branches, leaves. So there's a recipe for compost, and there's a big grinding and mixing process. So that would even physically start to break that down.
Thank you. I want to kind of revert a little bit back, so make a few comments, and then we can continue to have the questions. First of all, just want to cover, thank you so much. I already do participate in one of the composting groups. I partner with Urban Canopy. I subscribe there, but you got me extra motivated and very excited, even though I'm already a part of that journey. It just, learning these facts really meant a lot. And I think also the Jewish elements, which I know. So thank you, Rabbi Guy, for adding that to it, and for you, Benjamin, to really incorporate it well into the story. You told a really amazing story. Kind of the second part of this is just gonna right now add, we have a Green Team WhatsApp group where we post additional information and interest. I'm just going to share the link right now in the chat before I forget. So if anyone wants to join, even if you're not an ASBI member, doesn't matter. So I think it's fine to join. In addition, part of this was the idea of making shidduchs, and I'm going to share my screen again, sharing the slide that Benjamin posted originally. If I can find where to share my screen there. Okay. So let me make this full screen and not. I don't know if I know.
Want me to put, I'll put mine on.
Click where it says present in the top right.
Oh, okay. Thanks. I'm like not used to like, it was like within Google, whatever. So just want to go back to this slide a little bit because there are a lot of different options depending on your needs. And I think there are, so I'm a part of Urban Canopy, and there's the idea of you could have a bin, keep it either like if you have an outdoor deck area, and you could get it picked up once a month, twice a month, and you can sign up for different services. But some people, they don't have a space for storing that, or, you know, maybe the cost is a little bit higher. One area, the block bins, that first one is very exciting with the idea of the alley cart, or resource center, it seems is also an alley cart. And the idea of the ability where they'll put a cart in a central area if there are a few people that all want to go in. And I think you spend $10 a month with block bins. Not sure about resource center, but this is a really great opportunity, especially with a community that lives in the A-Roof where people live close together. Someone reached out earlier who couldn't join tonight, but was very excited about the composting shidduchs and said, oh, do they have to be an ASBI member? No. We hope that you can engage people that aren't members of ASBI, that aren't Jewish, and just spread the idea. But we also want to help you. And so if you want to, you know, you might know neighbors, please reach out to block bins, or please reach out to your neighbors and look into block bins, and get into that. But also, if you're looking, you're saying, oh, I really want to do this, and you don't know if there's an ASBI member that lives near you, or, you know, we would be happy to try to help make that work out. So help brainstorm who might live near you. I know like Laura and Ruth live near each other. Maybe they'll like be able to join in and find out like one or two other neighbors nearby. That's funny, Sarah. If they all need acceptable hectares, that's funny. So ASBI standard hectare, recommended hectares now. But the idea of we want to help, you know, especially right now, we aren't at shul, and while we want to make our shul more sustainable, we should be living that in our own lives, and we're all eating more at home if we could take that next step. So I think we really want to emphasize the idea, and please reach out to us for that help if you want, for getting, you know, a composting shidduch near you so that you could participate, especially if you aren't interested in a home bucket type setup.
So I don't know if it's because of the snow, but block bins has not been exactly responsive.
It is the snow. They have been struggling to catch up because the carts are trapped in the alleys. If they actually just made an offer that if you are in need of an additional cart, a second cart, it's easier for them to deliver you a second cart than it is for them to get the other cart collected.
So I sent them a picture of where we could put a cart, and they haven't gotten back to me about it.
Did you use your email? The email that I have?
Yes.
I will reach out to the owners tonight.
Excellent.
You guys got an in.
Thanks, Benjamin.
They'll ignore me too, but it's okay. No.
But the more hassling they get. No.
I've already been storing my food scraps, and my freezer is getting very full. So.
Oh, you are so good.
Well, I'm so sad to throw them out.
I know. I mean, once you start eyeing this stuff, it's like, oh my goodness, there's a lot here that could be composted.
And it's a dramatic change, because once you do it, you realize that you have obviously much less garbage, and the garbage that you accumulate, it's not the garbage with odor, it's packaging. So you don't need to even get out to the can often.
So true. And even I've gone to picnics, and you know, it's better to bring your own plate, but if people aren't going to do that, to have the wax-free plates. And then I've collected those and brought them back to the compost, just so that like even that, you know, remove that from the trash bins and help get that diversion. Are there any questions?
What about garden waste?
So in that case, it's a question of what your hauler will accept. The answer is absolutely compostable, 100% compostable. And I would say if you end up signed up with a program, cut it up a little bit. Don't expect that they're going to collect your I'm turning it over for the springtime and starting fresh by cutting everything down. But if you're just going to be, if you're in a grooming, pruning kind of a mode, it's going to be a smaller supply. I happen to subscribe to block bins, and that's the model that works for me and the price point that works for me. And they actually do say not to include the garden clippings, etc. But that's, if a little bit gets in there, if you just trim off a little bit, no big deal. Certainly from a composting perspective, that's an easier product to handle than the food scraps.
Thank you.
Hey, Benjamin, are there any easy wins or low-hanging fruit in terms of organizations, or whether it's a synagogue or a local grocery store or anything like that, that might not already be participating in something like this, where it would be relatively easy to convince them to do that, but it would also be a meaningful amount of compost that they would be diverting, as opposed to just one family at a time kind of thing?
Yeah, so my own personal bias, like I said, I spend most of my day on the compost use side of things, but my strong belief is that schools are the place to start. If you can get the kids oriented to composting and sorting the food scraps out, that's the message that they're going to take home. And once they understand and they see waste, their kids are bright. They're pretty intolerant. When they see adults messing up, they're not shy about calling us out on it, right? So if you can teach those kids, you can get them to care about their environment, make the case, they'll teach the parents. That's a multiplier that's outstanding. So I think that's the place to start. What's low hanging in that place? Unfortunately, the truth is the school has to have the financial resources to do it, or the commitment to do it. Chicago public schools, numerous Chicago public schools are already doing it. So the school model is not new. CPS actually has a very deliberate and established program. Again, I can connect you with people who could help with that.
Are they offering that across CPS or just at select schools?
It's a school by school case. There's one just west of you that did a showcase right before, it's probably about 3 months before the lockdown. They showed their whole operation, and it's outstanding. Okay. And they have a beehive on their roof. They're a really exciting school. It's not just that these are schools that are in a high socioeconomic environment. These are schools across the spectrum.
Okay, great.
With that, don't want to keep anyone over time if there's no more questions, but please interrupt me if there are. Thank you so much again, Benjamin. Please email sustainability@asbi.org. Laura posted that in the chat if you do want help or want more information. We really want to help all of you live the most sustainable life that you can. So, and also if you have any interest in anything else, first of all, if there's any topics that we could bring more education and a Jewish spin to, or if there's something that you might be an expert in, we want to take advantage of like the amazing, knowledgeable people that we have in our community. So please let us know if there's something that you might be happy to share. And with that, thank you again so much, Benjamin.
Thanks, Benjamin. Thank you everyone for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, this was great. Bye-bye.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Happy Purim.
Same to you.